by Royce Hassel and his wife Sylvia, a breast cancer survivor. The tours raised more than $500,000 for medical research.
We can help educate members and other people about the prevention and early detection for breast cancer, and just in general help them know more about how breast cancer can affect their lives.
To have them volunteer so many hours for free, you know, it was a big deal. It was very touching to me.
The DAR is dedicated to preserving America's historic landmarks, places like Meadow Garden in Augusta, Georgia. Built around 1790, this was the home of George Walton, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence.
It's important that we preserve this history and that we learn to appreciate our past, and it will hopefully give us courage and insight to move forward and to be better citizens.
Georgia Daughters not only maintain this property, but they've also launched a campaign to attract tours so more people can learn about George Walton's contributions.
And this is one way we can teach our children that there were men and women who were willing to sacrifice their homes and their lives and their property to give us the freedom that we have.
The DAR has preserved hundreds of local properties and placed markers at historical sites across the nation. Its library also preserves one of the largest collections of genealogy records. To join the DAR, women must trace their lineage to a Revolutionary War patriot, any soldier or civilian who aided the cause. But with the help of DAR genealogists and the internet, getting started on the research isn't hard.
We discover new patriots every day, patriots of all backgrounds. And there are a lot of people here who are willing to help you find what you need.
You can go to them, ask them for anything, you can share. It's just beautiful.
For Tennessee daughter Pazetta Millette, it turned out to be a fascinating journey of discovery.
I was so excited, I couldn't sleep.
Not only did she find relatives she never knew, but she also uncovered family history lost for generations, history that can now be passed on to her children and grandchildren.
To see what your ancestor did, the contribution that they made, history just comes to life.
Today's daughters are not only preserving the past, they also care about America's future. These seal pups were rescued along the California coast. Marine mammal centers treat these injured animals and return them to the wild. It's one of many conservation programs the DAR supports. However they choose to serve, today's daughters are committed to their mission.
To me personally, it means making an impact in my community and being right there and just learning and growing. And it's just been an amazing experience in my life.
Like many women, Lindsay Whitty is balancing the demands of a busy life. She joined a chapter that meets on Saturdays to accommodate members' needs.
Everybody can find a niche and everybody can find their particular place that they fit in the best.
I just think as a young woman especially, you need an outlet for yourself. You need something to do that will make you feel good about yourself, you'll find good friends, and you'll be able to also give back.
I'm today's DAR. I'm today's DAR. I'm today's DAR.
For today's daughters, DAR membership offers so many rewards.
You will meet ladies who you will become friends with for the rest of your life. And you just make friends all over the United States and even all over the world.
Their friendship and knowing them will add a new layer and a new dimension to your life.
This is really what's kept me going. It's what keeps me young. It keeps me interested.
We have a lot of fun, let me tell you, we really do.
It fills your heart and soul. Every little pocket of your heart and soul can be filled by something that DAR offers you.
And to know that you are united with 100,000 plus women, it's incredible.
I'm today's DAR.
I'm today's DAR.
I'm today's DAR.
Today's DAR is carrying on its tradition of patriotism and service, giving its best to America.
We are fortunate to be Americans, and it is up to us to continue the legacy that our founders began and to make this a better country.
A plan of attack, like something that maybe the military would use?
It's a plan that my daughter uses to plan for her basketball games.
Strategic plan is how I get my wife and kids in an area that they don't want to be.
It's a document that's strategically done.
A strategic plan would be the implementation of a vision.
A strategic plan is a guiding, fluid document that helps a city plan for its future. The goals and objectives have been identified through community input.
This program is made possible with support from the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission's Department of Parks and Recreation.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
We all know the song.
So proudly we hail.
It has been ingrained in our national consciousness. But what is the real story of the Star-Spangled Banner?
It would be really wonderful if every American could understand the true story behind how our national anthem came about.
I mean, we had no federal government to back us up, no federal army to speak of, and yet the people of Baltimore decided that the country's future depended on the actions that they would take together and as individuals to defend the great idea of what our country could become.
Join us as we explore the origins of Francis Scott Key's composition and its journey to become one of the most famous songs in the world.
I take a tremendous amount of pride that whenever I'm at events around the country and the Star-Spangled Banner is sung, that I can always smile and know that that's a Maryland song, that this was a story that was written by the heroism and the courage and the actions of Marylanders at a very dark time in our country's history.
From 1812 to 1815, the United States of America engaged in its last armed conflict with England.
1814 is the year the Empire strikes back. They burn public Washington to the ground, the Capitol building, the White House, ruins.
But in the War of 1812, the actions were sometimes extremely violent. Men died, some of them horribly. And it's very difficult, even from this distance, to look back and think what that must have been like. But I actually think it's very important that we try to envisage what those men went through and why they went through it. Why did they perform this duty?
Why should Americans know anything about this guy, Francis Scott Key? He was just an attorney in Georgetown. Well, it turns out that he happened to be present at the bombardment of Fort McHenry, and he also happened to like to write lyrics to songs, and he also did some poetry. And out of all of that came our national anthem.
And welcome Myshio Miller, who will sing our national anthem.
When you hear our national anthem performed at a major sporting event, how close to Francis Scott Key's vision is that performance?
The Star-Spangled Banner is supposed to have been based on a British drinking song.
I've come to believe that all the world is made of stories, and for the longest part of our history, we told and retold those stories, very often with the help of melodies.
We often turn to music when the spoken word or printed word is not enough.
When you're singing, you can say some things that you don't know how to say in words.
The extra edge that music has is the melody that conveys those words.
A song is always easier to remember than just a verse.
With the lyrics and with the poetry put to music so that not only we could remember it more easily, but also so others could retell it and so that we could tell it together.
The
Baltimore Colts fight song was written in 1947 for the All-America Conference Baltimore Colts. It was used by 5 different professional football teams in this city. This, next to the Stars of Spangled Banner, is the most popular song in Baltimore. The fans know some of the words, but they know the words fight, 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 and they scream it. So that shows you the power of music just in a football game.
Sometimes we're not even conscious that we've turned to song. When you go to a birthday party, you just sort of expect you're going to sing happy birthday. When you walk into a church or a synagogue, there's certain kind of music that you expect to happen there. You go to a funeral, you expect the music to be appropriate to that setting.
Music can be very emotional. My father was a musician, and he was in the Navy. He was a trumpet player. And because of that, I've been to more funerals than I would care to remember, where my dad was playing taps. And as young as I was, and through all of those years, it's really had a profound effect upon me. So when my brother died and my father died, and you hear taps, knowing that here my father was someone that actually played taps at some of these kinds of events, it's a very emotional time for me. But I find that to be the same way with the Star-Spangled Banner, because I am so interested in the War of 1812. And I really have an appreciation for what went on at that time and how the song really came about, that when I hear that song, I do get chills up my spine.
Once the civil rights movement is in full swing, many different elements are in play. The church leaders of the day knew the power of marching arm in arm with melodies that were familiar from church as well.
In 1968, April of 1968, I worked for WMAR-TV, and I got a call on a Saturday night, come into work. And that was when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I was at work for 1 week, and didn't realize I would be there that long. And we were put right out into the riots in Baltimore. And to see your city burn is a tragedy.
During a time of strife, it may not be that people consciously know why they fall back on music.
As we're coming down the streets shooting film in those days, you see a church group coming out of a church, and looking at one side, you look to your left, and you see the people coming out. It was Palm Sunday, singing We Shall Overcome. And you look to the other side, and you see people rioting and burning buildings. To me, again, music. It came to music. The rioters stopped, looked over at the people at the church, and just stood there. And the people didn't budge. They said, we shall overcome. They were doing their music of peace.
Music has obviously an emotional connective power that you don't get just with printed words. Key was born during the American Revolution. Music was very much an amateur affair. There were very few professionals. Music was done on such an informal basis. And the context of it, of course, is life is very quiet and very slow and very dull. So there's a strong need for people to teach themselves how to play the fiddle, to be able to accompany an informal dance.
I love the idea of music as a living, breathing, changing thing. One really good example of that is a tune called The Rose Tree. Common song, common tune. It was in The Poor Soldier, a very favorite opera of George Washington's. That became more of a dance tune. And when a fiddler plays a dance tune, you know, the dance might go on for 12 times through the tune, and you play it the 12th time and you're just getting kind of bored. And you do it another night 12 times and you start to change it around. And all those extra notes then are added because of the boredom of the fiddle player.
Music is always going to fill a function. In the days of Francis Scott Key, that function was very, very broad. You know, the soldiers marching to engagements. It's the drum that sets the cadence for the march, but it's the fife that gives it color.
We've powder plenty, grape shot too, so have we men to hand them. Of musket balls we have a few, I feel fear they cannot stand. Yankee Doodle, beat the drum, Yankee Doodle dandy, and if by day or night they...
You don't always need a musical instrument, though, to have a song. And I think in many cases, in the colonial period and up through the 1812 era, very much music making occurred just by singing.
When Coburn passed the fort below and Ross was past the point, sir, he gave 3 cheers to let them know that he was not behind, sir. Yankee Doodle, beat the drum, Yankee Doodle dandy, and if by day or night they come, they'll always find us handy.
Leading into the early 19th century, there's still a very strong sense of separation between the elite and the rest. The one place you'd find these people together would be the theaters. And in the theaters would be a mixture of straight drama, of ballad opera, presentational dancing, solo songs. In America, much more so than in Europe at this time, the audience takes more and more control over what's performed by calling for Yankee Doodle, by calling for Hail Columbia, by encoring songs, not just once or twice or 3 times, but 5, 6, 7 times. The audience has the apple in hand it will throw if it's not happy.
Let glory proclaim to the hills of the west the triumphs of freedom afar. Our song be Decatur and liberty blessed, huzzah for the brave and the war.
What we see right after the Revolution is the beginning of the professionalization of America's musical industry. We start to see building of theaters. We see an influx of professional printers and composers.
Publishing was very expensive. In Key's day, it was far more expensive to publish a piece, even just a single sheet of music, than it is today, by a long shot. It was much easier to print pages of words that could be sung to a familiar tune, as opposed to printing an entire hymnal, so that you could have a collection of word books that were also very popular. As a matter of fact, we know a lot about early performances from word books as well as from the actual music. So it made a whole lot more economic sense to be able to print collections of texts and then indicate which hymn tune they might fit with.
You know, the ballads that tell the stories of great heroes and so forth, many of these were never written down. We'll never know them. It's only the more popular ones, or the ones of greater interest, that at some point a printer puts the words into type and runs off copies. And by, say, 1810, we start to get into the mass production of sheet music. We had been importing it from England and other European countries for a while, but we really get into printing by then. And it's that mechanism that's in place when the Star-Spangled Banner is first put into sheet music form.
Francis Scott Key came to Annapolis at the age of 10 and began the first of 7 years at St. John's College,
which even today, more than 200 years later, subscribes to the broad, great books study of Greek, of a language, science, exposure to cultures going well back in time. Especially as he rubs shoulders with other wealthier gentlemen. This expectation of writing poetry, of having a sensitivity, a cultural heart, was very important.
He was very fortunate, even though at a young age he was away from home, but he had family that lived in Annapolis and just outside of Annapolis.
He stayed with his great-aunt and uncle, whom he was named after, Dr. Upton Scott.
Dr. Scott served in the Royal Army and was also the personal physician to the colonial governor, Sharp. And so here we have Key, who we think of as a great American patriot, who spent many of his formative years in the house of what we could call a loyalist.
Francis Scott Key was a religious man within the Episcopal Church, not just attending services, but taking leadership roles as well. And therefore he would have been exposed to church music. In fact, he ended up composing a couple of hymns.
After he graduated from St. John's College, he was at a crossroads. He didn't know if he wanted to go into the ministry or whether he wanted to become an attorney.
Francis Scott Key was my four-greats-grandfather. And he and his wife Polly were married here in Annapolis.
When Key married into the Lloyd family, he married into a very musical family. Mrs. Lloyd, his mother-in-law, played on the English guitar. Music was an important defining aspect of upper-class life.
The Lloyd family might have been a little hesitant that their daughter was marrying someone who was maybe not quite at the same level that they were. But nevertheless, the marriage did take place. It appears that it was a very happy marriage.
And he was very close to his whole family. And I think I have this feeling they had a lot of fun together.
And as far as I can determine, they got along well with the Lloyd family.
Whether it's the national anthem or My Country 'Tis Thee, it shouldn't surprise any of us that some of our patriotic songs are based on English melodies. I mean, we were the 13 English colonies at one point in time.
Melody in the 18th century was not owned by anybody. I like to think of it as being a pot of melody from which everybody can freely take whatever they need.
In musical terminology, parody is when new words are created for an existing melody.
You might know it as Lazy Mary, will you get up?
This is the way we wash our clothes.
Same exact melody. This was called Nancy Dawson in the 18th century. And again, it was used for many, many, many things. It was a marching tune. It was a song melody for many, many songs.
Yankee Doodle, unbelievably popular in military and civilian settings, but a highly symbolic tune. Always a taunting song, always a teasing song.
Well, Yankee Doodle is a humorous nickname, so we are embracing a contemptuous term and turning it to our benefit and saying, all right, okay, you want to call us Yankee Doodle? Well, here's our little song.
The taunting nature of Yankee Doodle was used over and over again. There are Yankee Doodles that attacked Thomas Jefferson over the Sally Hemings affair. It lasts, and up through the Civil War, up into the 20th century, and even today, really. I mean, people, it's one of the tunes you can just goof around with. Everyone knows it.
Lost again. Hey, Pete, give us a song.
Yeah, Pete. They tell us they're too big to fail and folks should not be queasy. So many houses up for sale, the banks make it so easy. Yankee Doodle, pay your bills, Yankee Doodle dandy. Keep your lenders guessing still and with your cash be handy.
What about unemployment?
The jobless rate is through the roof, economy's a doozy. It doesn't pay to be aloof. We beggars can't be choosy. Yankee Doodle, pay your bills, Yankee Doodle dandy. Keep your lenders guessing still and with your cash be handy.
Well, somebody told me that God Save the King had been set to a drinking song. It wouldn't embarrass me or annoy me. I would actually be quite impressed by it. The Star-Spangled Banner is supposed to have been based on a British drinking song. Well, of course, it isn't. It's based on a song that was created by, effectively, a cultural society.
Edinburgh, Scotland was a true cultural centre and intellectual centre as well. And it seems to be the birthplace of these serious gentlemen's clubs, not just for the food and the drink, but really I think the impetus had to do with intellectual stimulation. This whole idea moved quickly to London, and of course anything that was popular in London, the colonists would want to pick up on.
No more shall fame expand her wings.
Some of these social clubs have survived into the 21st century.
Well, the Beefsteak Society, its full title is the Sublime Society of Beefsteaks, and it was founded in 1735 by John Rich, who owned the Covent Garden Theatre. We have our own song of the day, as it's called, and Beefsteak Anthem, the president, which goes by rotation, has to sing, whether he can or not.
In the mid-1760s, a group of London gentlemen form a club devoted to music and mirth. The club is named after Anacreon, one of the great lyric poets of ancient Greece.
Anacreon really is famous for his love poetry and his drinking songs. Really the perfect figure to found a kind of drinking/philosophical society upon. Unlike Homer, who writes about great heroes and gods, really it seems that Anacreon is for the most part interested in writing about his love affairs and about having fun at symposia, which are the drinking parties the aristocrats would hold almost nightly. He is a drinker. He's a co-reveler. He talks about himself being drunk, and some of the ancient commentators even said that he wrote all his poems while he was drunk. So it would be this combination of somebody who is able to hold his liquor, so to speak, at the same time that he can spin off some of the more polished poetry of the day.
Almost immediately after its formation, word spread about how much fun it was to come to a meeting of the Anacreontic Society.
The society met every other Wednesday in the coffee houses and taverns of the Strand. The evening would begin with a professional concert. After a late supper, the remainder of the evening was devoted to conviviality.
A very large number of toasts, and that really ensures that the evening doesn't end up dreadfully sober, because not only are there society toasts, but every single member has to give his toast, and every single guest has to give a toast. So you can have at least 50 or 60 toasts sometimes, and the people can just get up and give a toast.
To Anacreon in heaven, where he sat in full glee, a few sons of harmony sent a petition.
In the mid-1770s, the Society's third president wrote the words to their constitutional song.
Arrived from that jolly old Grecian.
Young composer and honorary member John Stafford Smith created the melody.
I'll lend you my name and inspire you to boot. And besides I'll instruct you like me to entwine the myrtle of Venus with Bacchus's vine.
And besides I'll instruct you like me to entwine.
A glee is a song for a soloist and a chorus. The chorus is to amplify and give the stamp of approval as the story unfolds verse by verse.
It became very, very popular. And people started singing the song, just normal everyday folk in London.
What this meant is the music could spread high and low. And that's how it came to America, in printed sheet music form.
Even though the club itself was rather exclusive, it was a popular club because people wanted to join it, but the song everybody could sing.
Ye sons of Columbia who bravely have fought.
By the end of the 18th century, the Anacreontic song had reached America and began to flourish in parodies.
By far the most popular version, American version to date, in 1798, was Adams and Liberty, or the Boston Patriotic Song. These were new words put together by Thomas Paine, not the Paine we think of from Revolutionary era, but a different Thomas Paine. His words were really sort of the beginning of the patriotic nature of this text. We suddenly find now it's no longer a song of celebration, no longer a song about wine and women, but instead it's a song of nationalism.
Mid the reign of mild peace may your nation increase with the glory of Rome and the wisdom of Greece. And ne'er may the sons of Columbia be slaves, while the earth bears a plant or the sea rolls its waves. And ne'er may the sons of Columbia be slaves, while the earth bears a plant or the sea rolls its waves.
Almost a decade before the attack on Fort McHenry, Francis Scott Key wrote his first song to this melody, and this was for a dinner for Stephen Decatur.
In 1801, the Pasha of Tripoli declared war on the United States. The First Barbary War tested the fledgling American Navy and created a new generation of heroes.
The Barbary War is the first war we fight after our independence, and it's the first time war is declared upon the United States. The Barbary States were a collection of countries in North Africa. Most of them were nominally part of the Ottoman Empire, but not really. They ran their own affairs. And they lived off extortion. They ran a protection racket. If you paid these guys off, they would leave your shipping alone. If you didn't, they would practice piracy upon you. They would capture your ships, they would sell the crews into slavery, or they'd hold them for ransom. And this was the way these little countries made money. And they also did it in the name of Islam, but I think their real religion was extortion.
One of our frigates, the Philadelphia, had actually ran onto a sandbar just outside of Tripoli. Decatur, along with a volunteer crew, went out and were able to successfully get on board that vessel and burn it to keep it out of the Barbary pirate hands. And because of that, he became a naval hero.
In December of 1805, at a dinner honoring Decatur, a gentleman of Georgetown presented a new song to the Anacreontic tune.
By this time, Adams and Liberty had been sung thousands of times, had been published and republished and copied and referenced. And so his choice of this melody for a toast, for public recognition of a returning hero, was really in place by 1805.
There were several ideas from this song that Key would use again 9 years later.
You have to remember that for 25 years, American history is occurring in the shadow of a world war between Britain and revolutionary France. This is longer than World War I and II put together. It's as violent as both of them. It's as ideological as the Cold War. There's this huge struggle in Europe between the two superpowers of the earth, and we are a little country on the edges of this conflict, trying not to be sucked into it.
Free trade and sailors' rights is a very important slogan within the War of 1812. It's something that all historians will light upon.
Free trade refers to the restrictions that have been put on our trade by both of the belligerents. Both Britain and France are telling us that we can't trade with the other country.
The embargo was a huge mistake.
Dear sirs, it is wrong to demand a new song. I have let all the breath I can spare go. With the muse I've conferred, and she won't say a word, but keeps laughing about the embargo.
We're a country with a big commercial economy. We get a lot of money from the trading that we do.
So what does Thomas Jefferson decide to do? To create our own embargo, to make it illegal for our ships to trade with France and with England.
But it's really, I think, James Madison's idea.
In a time that we try to put out Britain's eye, I fear we shall let our own pair go. Yet still we're so wise we can see with French eyes, and then we shall like the embargo.
If you lived in New England, where you're so dependent upon trade with all of these countries, and now we have an embargo by our own country, all that does is make things even more difficult. So there are all kinds of protests.
We're going to cut off our nose to spite their faces. That's what the embargo means. Sailors' rights refers to the impressment issue. It's the right of a sailor to choose what country he will be a citizen of, what ships he's going to sail on.
I find it surprising that Britain thought it could stop a neutral ship and muster the ship's company, discover, if they could, whether there were British citizens on board, and then impress those men into the Royal Navy.
England had a difficult time getting enough sailors to operate their ships. A ship of the line could require hundreds of men. Well, how many people were willing to join the Royal Navy to essentially have a pretty brutal life on board one of these naval vessels?
There was just a lot of potential for confusion and abuse, especially since Britain and America spoke the same language.
Lest Britain should take a few men by mistake, who under false colours may dare go, we're manning their fleet with our tars who retreat from poverty, sloth, and embargo.
In 1807, the British stopped an American warship, the Chesapeake, fired on it, and came aboard and took off 4 sailors, one of whom they immediately hanged. The other 3 they put in prison. If Congress had been sitting at that time, it was on recess, if Congress had been sitting, we would have declared war right then. It's called Madison's War because he asked Congress to declare it. It was the narrowest vote to go to war that we would ever have in American history.
We were interested in expanding our country. We believed that we should own everything in North America, from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast. And what was one of the biggest prizes that was out there? It's what we call Canada today.
Madison wanted to invade Canada probably as a bargaining chip.
It was believed by many of the war hawks, all we had to do was to march into Canada, they would surrender, and Canada would be ours.
You know, if we got Canada, then maybe we could make the British back off on their other actions that we disliked. We would certainly break the pipeline from Canada to Indians like Tecumseh, who were harassing and pillaging our frontier.
None of the invasions of Canada were successful, not one.
During the first year of the war, a series of American naval victories offset the embarrassing losses in Canada.
Come cheer up, my lads, let's together unite, for our country, our laws, and religion to fight. While our tars sweep the ocean, our troops line the shore. Let the Britons but face us, we...
Heart of Oak is the march of the Royal Navy. I've marched to it many times. As a former Royal Naval officer, I found it slightly distressing to hear my tune, which always lifts my heart, with words which perhaps in 1812 I would have found difficult to face. If I was in an inn in 1812 and I heard someone singing those words to my tune, I think there might have been a fight.
When the war started, the United States was really not well prepared. They did not have a very large standing army, and they had a relatively small navy. And here we're going to war with what could be considered the greatest military power at that time.
Whilst on board the Shannon frigate in the merry month of May, watching the bold Americans off Boston Heights we lay, our ship she lay at anchor.
So when you have an American frigate that gets captured for the first time, and we're talking about the Shannon versus the Chesapeake, this was a big deal.
The capture of the American frigate Chesapeake was celebrated in the theaters of London.
She comes in glorious style, to quarters fly, my heart's of oak, success shall soon reward our toil. Exclaim the gallant Captain Brooke, 3 cheers, my brave lads, let our honor be speak, then give them a taste of our cannon. And soon, my bold fellows, the proud Chesapeake shall lower her flag to the Shannon.
With most of her forces still engaged in Europe, a small British fleet set sail for the Chesapeake Bay.
Most people don't even know that the Chesapeake suffered more raids than any other theater of war.
Located in the heart of the 15 United States, the region had a thriving maritime and agricultural economy.
All of that changed in the winter of 1812-1813. The British ordered a blockade to be established at the mouth of the Chesapeake. Pretty much by March, there was a British presence there. This severely affected trade.
The British quickly established a base at Tangier Island. The man in charge would leave a lasting impression on the people of the region.
Coburn was pretty ruthless. He was hated by many Americans, but particularly by those in the Chesapeake.
Well, George Coburn first was a very good naval commander. He was very able, he was a good seaman, and he was a good leader of men. He was also lucky, I think, that a very short time into the conflict of 1812, he was given a commander over him in Alexander Cochrane, one from a great naval family.
To me, the real sad part of the war was all of the raiding that took place, because we had a foreign country that had invaded the United States. The British decided to head up to the Upper Bay, and this is in April, May, and June of 1813. And that's when it really brought the war home, because what they did is they went up and they attacked places like Havre de Grace and literally destroyed it. Baltimore pretty much knew that they would be a likely target.
Baltimore is the third largest city in the country. It is a booming port, very strategic.
And the British knew that a lot of privateers were being built there.
The United States government had employed private vessels since the Revolution. These so-called privateers were sanctioned to harass and engage enemy merchant vessels.
And then in exchange, of course, there's a prize, and that major portion goes to the individual that owns the ship and, of course, the people who were the crew on the ship. Privateering has been something that's been going on in Baltimore for a long time.
And if they can reduce Baltimore, that will be a huge victory for them.
In the summer of 1813, George Armistead is given command of the large fort defending Baltimore Harbor.
He decided that he needed a larger flag, and so he went to Mary Pickersgill. And he ordered a flag that was 42 feet by 30 feet. That is a big, big flag. We tend to say Mary Pickersgill made the flag, but she had an awful lot of help as well. When the English defeat Napoleon in 1814, this was bad, bad news for the United States.
1814 is the year the Empire strikes back, the British Empire. Napoleon has been beaten in Europe. They can transfer forces to North America, and they're going to end this troublesome war with this troublesome former colony. And they plan several attacks of the American mainland. One is in the north down Lake Champlain. The final one will be on New Orleans in the south, but then the third big one is in the Chesapeake.
In the summer of 1814, General Sir Robert Ross and his army reinforce Coburn's fleet in the Chesapeake.
Ross is in command of troops that had fought in the Iberian Peninsula against Napoleon.
And the first prong of it goes to Washington.
In late August, the British Army marches on Washington City. Unprepared, the American defenses are defeated at Bladensburg.
Key is present at the Battle of Bladensburg as a civilian, not as a militiaman.
They burn public Washington to the ground, the Capitol building, the White House, ruins.
A surprising fact is that the Americans burnt more buildings than did the British. And that's because the Navy Yard was ordered to be destroyed to keep it out of British hands.
After occupying Washington City, the Army returns to the fleet. One of their prisoners is Dr. William Beans.
He was a very prominent physician that lived in Upper Marlboro. Well, Beans was so popular that the people in the community did everything in their power to try to seek his release.
John Skinner, an American agent for prisoner exchange, is dispatched to negotiate the release of Dr. Beans. Sent with him is an attorney from Georgetown.
And that attorney just happens to be Francis Scott Key. So Key goes to Baltimore to join Skinner, where they hop on a packet boat with a white flag, meaning it's a truce vessel. They sail down the Chesapeake looking for the British fleet.
After 2 days, they eventually find the British fleet and begin negotiations.
What convinced them, however, is that along with them, the Americans brought letters from some of the wounded soldiers who were left behind at the Battle of Bladensburg. And those letters attested to how well they were being treated by the Americans. And so when these letters were shown to the British officers, they agreed to release Beans. But because by this time these Americans knew the intent of the British, and that was to now attack Baltimore, they were kind of under house arrest. They weren't prisoners, but they weren't allowed to leave. So that means that as the British are moving up the Chesapeake and eventually up the Patapsco River for the bombardment of Fort McHenry, Francis Scott Key, Dr. Beans, and John Stuart Skinner, along with the crew of the packet vessel, are all witnessing the bombardment from the British perspective.
Imagine, if you will, the total turnaround of events. I mean, with Washington burned, the people of Baltimore actually looked to the south, and they saw the sky lit up from the burning of their nation's capital. And then, within just 2 weeks' time, that feeling of utter destruction, of utter despair, of feeling as if a doom was just about to come up the bay, the people of Baltimore rallied. They dug trenches. They fortified their own fort. People from the countryside came in here, and we decided to make our stand, and we decided not to yield, not 1 inch. We were going to carry this day, whether we had a national government to back us up or not. We had each other, and we were going to hold firm.
As the fleet approached Baltimore, the Americans on the truce ship remembered the plans of the British.
The British were very, very astute. They realized that if they could take the fort, and by that, of course, I mean Fort McHenry, they then would be able to get their vessels close enough to bombard the city itself.
Unlike Washington, D.C., Baltimore is very well defended. It has fortifications. The militia general in charge of its defense, who's Senator Samuel Smith, does a very competent job organizing the defense.
So what the British decided to do was a two-pronged approach, and they typically did this through most of the war. They would send troops by land at North Point that would then try to attack the city on the east side. And then they would also use their flotilla to try to bombard Fort McHenry. If they were able to take Fort McHenry, they could then move closer and support their land forces. If Baltimore had fallen, it's very likely that the United States would have sued for peace.
On Sunday, September 11th, the British fleet arrived at North Point and began landing their troops after midnight.
So imagine if you're Francis Scott Key and you're being held on board the British fleet, the largest enemy fleet that ever came into the Chesapeake Bay, and you see thousands of troops preparing to land at North Point, and you see bomb ships, you see rocket ships, you see large warships with their cannons all getting ready to attack Baltimore.
And he had already been out into the bay for days before, encountering the British fleet, interacting with the British, obtaining the promise of the release.
And then thinking about what had just happened at Bladensburg, where the Americans did not perform very well. I suspect that Key and Skinner and even Beans were very, very worried about what might happen.
In an early skirmish, British morale is dealt a serious blow when General Ross is mortally wounded by an American sniper.
Ross was one of the best officers that they had here in North America at that time.
At 6 a.m. on Tuesday, September 13th, the bombardment of Fort McHenry begins.
And so the bombardment took place with large ships standing off alongside the troop ships. They were firing at long cannon, but at such a distance they weren't really having a lot of effect. So Cochrane sends in rocket barges carrying Congreve rockets.
That was the terror of the war at that time. This is something that the Americans had never seen before. Many of the Americans first saw them at the Battle of Bladensburg, and they began to realize that maybe they weren't accurate. But by golly, they sure did scare you, because as they're coming across the sky, they're whistling, smoke's coming out, sparks are coming out, and then they can explode.
And also accompanied by 4 bomb ships. These were firing large mortars. They were firing shot that was 13 inches in diameter, weighing hundreds of pounds.
The effect of a mortar shell, or a bomb, if you want to call it that, is that it can come up over the walls of the fort and land inside of the fort.
This is devastating. This happens hour after hour after hour, almost as though we were in a First World War trench under a bombardment for hours on end. The noise would have been horrendous. The bombs bursting in air, as Key puts it. The rockets' red glare, all of these things, they're frightening, they're terrifying.
What was the weather like at this time? Well, it was stormy. And because it was stormy, you've got clouds in the sky. Well, when you have an explosion underneath clouds, that light is reflected in those clouds, which makes it even more awesome.
The huge flag itself, the Star-Spangled Banner, was not flying in the rain, was not flying at night.
Well, there's no question that there were two flags that were made for the fort. There was the largest flag that we refer to as the garrison flag, and there was a smaller flag that we refer to as the storm flag. What were the conditions during the bombardment of the fort? It was rainy. If you had the garrison flag flying at that time that was made out of wool bunting, it would have absorbed so much water, it would have weighed, they estimate, around 400 pounds and probably would have caused the flagstaff to actually collapse. So is it likely that it was the garrison flag that flew over the fort during the bombardment, even though most Americans believe that? Not likely. It was almost certainly the storm flag. We have no idea what happened to the storm flag. We have no idea even what the storm flag looked like.
In fact, this drawing in watercolor, probably made shortly afterward, shows a flag over the fort with an unusual layout of the stars. It also shows an American vessel among the front line of British ships. Was this Key's location during the bombardment?
The rain had pretty much stopped, and the sun was beginning to come out. So early in the morning, the bombardment now stops.
After determining the fleet could not support an attack of the earthworks and troops defending Baltimore, the British land forces withdraw.
Well, this was a pretty momentous occasion for not just the guys who were in this fort, but for all of the citizens in Baltimore, because they began to realize, okay, something has happened here. Are the British, have they stopped the attack? Have we won? What's going on?
To see the Star-Spangled Banner just still floating must have lifted his spirits and his heart, and perhaps must have inspired him immediately.
There are a bunch of issues going on. Was he thinking out loud? Was he quoting something that somebody else like Skinner might have said or Beans might have asked?
What's so powerful about the Star-Spangled Banner? The first verse is a question. It ends on a question. It's not answered. Is it still there? Will it still be flying? And then only in the second verse do we see, yes, it is. It's beaten back this attack. It's still up there waving.
And then little by little they began to realize that the British ships are beginning to prepare to withdraw back down the Patapsco River.
Armistead orders the fort's morning gun fired at 9 o'clock. A band plays Yankee Doodle as the large garrison flag is raised.
If I were a militiaman and I was standing on the fortifications on the east side of Baltimore, and I saw the British withdrawing, and I saw the fleet moving down the Patapsco River, I would have been beside myself with joy. Because not only did I have to face possible death, but we realized that we had a major victory.
And so it's not just a happy song. It takes you through the darkness. It takes you through the effort and the struggle. And then after that, if you struggle hard enough, yes, the flag is still flying.
Well, on the other hand, think about what was it like for the British. It was pretty galling for them to have to see this grand flag flying over the fort and knowing that they were unsuccessful, because that's something that they were not accustomed to.
Key and the others were not immediately released. Skinner's duties as agent of prisoner exchange were required at North Point.
You've got around 5,000 troops that have to be ferried out into small boats to be put on the troop transports. So by the time all of this is done, a day and a half has gone by before the British are officially departing the Patapsco River. And it's only at that point that Francis Scott Key and John Stuart Skinner and Dr. William Beans are released.
In all, he was away almost 10 days. And during such a long period of time, there's plenty going on in a gentleman amateur poet's mind.
And what do they go past as they're heading toward Baltimore? They go right by Fort McHenry. By this time, the large garrison flag, the huge flag that we referred to as the Star-Spangled Banner, is proudly flying over the fort.
I mean, remember, he had written a full song, many verses, almost a decade before. And in that song, he had referenced the Star-Spangled Flag of our nation.
And that night, while he's in a hotel, he began to put those words down on paper. And as we believe, those are the very words that are on this manuscript that is preserved at the Maryland Historical Society.
Well, we'll never know exactly how the song came together. But that it was stewing and brewing melodically in his heart and in his mind. That's significant. This was not cold poetry. This was a living melody.
Oh, thus be it ever when free men shall stand between their loved home and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, when our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
And the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
In late 1814, Americans were truly celebrating the successful defense of Baltimore.
Not surprisingly, given the tremendous shot in the arm that the defense of Baltimore was for the nation, the Star-Spangled Banner was not the only music that told the story of what happened here in this place for our country's history.
Other songs, also put to familiar tunes, were written about the attack, but none were as popular as Key's.
So how does a good song spread at this time? It spreads if it's liked, if it resonates with people.
Key's words were first published as a broadside within a day of his return.
I guarantee you that on the way to the fort, that whoever was hand-carrying these broadsides, 1,000 broadsides, that's a lot. We're not talking a ream of modern paper here. We're talking old sheet, heavy paper. We're talking people most likely just gleefully marching through the streets, sharing it, giving it away. Reports are that when sung in the theater, it would bring the house down, that with repeated encores. Obviously, that's where that song should be, in the public. Holiday Street Theater sat about 2,000 people. Can you imagine the resonance of 2,000 people?
One way to define the outcome of the War of 1812 is status quo ante. Nothing changes. But in any draw between a superpower and a lesser power, if the lesser power leaves it with the situation as it was, they can rightfully claim victory.
As the years went on, and 4th of July celebrations, presidential inaugurals, public gatherings, the Star-Spangled Banner began to take its place as a national song. In competition with the Star-Spangled Banner through the 19th century was Hail Columbia, a set of patriotic words written in 1798. To a march that was originally composed for George Washington. As we go through the middle of the 19th century, probably the Star-Spangled Banner and Hail Columbia were the two most called for nationalistic tunes. When you hear our national anthem performed at a major sporting event, how close to Francis Scott Key's vision is that performance? We're used to hearing our national anthem beginning on what's called a descending arpeggio. It's a triad sung one note at the time from the top down. Oh, say can you... that's the definitive opening melodic material of our national anthem. But that's not how the song went back then. In fact, there are publications of the Star-Spangled Banner as late as 1910, only 100 years ago, where it still is starting, as it did in Key's day, at the bottom of this triad. Oh, say, can you see? Bum-ba-dum. That's an ornament. It was added. And it wasn't really even formalized. And it didn't become the only way to do it until less than a century ago. Another interesting change, if you look back at the Anacreontic tune, where he sat in full glee, da-da-da-dum, that's not the way we do it anymore. We sing it, ya-da-da-da-da-dum. So for whatever reason, it seems to be Thomas Carr, the Maryland organist and printer and of the Carr family of publishers, who came up with this innovation of da-da-da-dum.
It became popular to the point that the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy typically used it in many of their ceremonies.
In fact, John Philip Sousa, who was for a time the leader of the United States Marine Band, Sousa had a lot to do with encouraging the performance of this piece, not just in America, but on his world tours, and heightening people's awareness of this great tune.
It's hard to believe that a country that was formed in 1775, 1776 did not have a national anthem until 1931.
In 1918, Maryland Congressman John Charles Linthicum received a one-sentence letter from the Maryland Daughters of 1812.
Mrs. Holloway was a go-getter. When she believed in a cause, she went with it. Not just Star Spangled Banner, but anything. And she was going to make Star Spangled Banner because of Baltimore. She was a homer like me. That was going to be our national anthem. There was no two ways about it, and she got the job done.
In this letter, they pointed out that Francis Scott Key was from Maryland. They pointed out that the defense of Fort McHenry, later known as the Star Spangled Banner, took place in Maryland. And as their Maryland representative, they formally requested him to put legislation before the president to make the Star Spangled Banner our national anthem.
And so there was a resolution put before Congress, and it failed. And the reason that it failed is that the American public could not come together on what that song should be. Should it be America the Beautiful, which is very popular? Should it be Hail Columbia, which was used oftentimes, particularly in military situations? Or should it be the Star Spangled Banner? Or should it be something else altogether?
In 1929, Linthicum's bill for the anthem finally made it to the floor of Congress.
So this debate began, and there were a lot of people who believed that it should not be the Star Spangled Banner because, number one, it's very difficult to sing.
It's a hard song to sing because of the tremendous range. So you've got to be careful to start it in the right key. Otherwise, you get to a point in the song when it goes high when you either have to shift octaves or scrape. And that can be something very embarrassing and difficult, not only for the singer, but for those who would sing along.
Number two, it's a song about a war.
Is it belligerent? Yes, a little bit. But so is nation building, so is defending a nation.
There were other people who believed that because this was a drinking song, and we know, of course, that that's not technically true, it was a gentleman's club song, but why would we want to promote a song that is supposedly based on drinking? There were just many, many different opinions.
On March 3, 1931, President Herbert Hoover signed the law adopting the Star Spangled Banner as the national anthem of the United States.
Today we're coming up on 200 years after the event, but less than 100 years after it has been named to be our national anthem. Is it secure in its place?
The Star Spangled Banner is stirring, it's martial, but it's also elegant, and it's a joy when one hears it sung. It's uplifting, and perhaps more so even than my own national anthem, which I'm very proud and I love to sing. I think the Star Spangled Banner has just that touch with history.
It's tradition, it's reinforcing, it's crossing generations.
You know, it's a little high, it takes some effort. That's good. Should take a little effort.
That question's still important today, and it's resonant today, and it speaks to all of us today. And the question is this still the land of the free and the home of the brave? Does that flag still fly over a courageous, giving, generous, and brave people? And that's a question that each of us has the responsibility to answer in the story we choose to write as individuals and choose to write with our families in order to make our country a great republic for the future.
For the
There's an awful fright on the streets tonight, far below the harvest moon. Washington lies sacked and burned, their guns will be here soon. But as I ride forth to Armstead's Fort, know my thoughts will be of you. Not an inch will yield beneath God's shield, with our neighbors strong and true. We'll stand alone for love and liberty. We'll stand alone for this one land of the free. And when the bombs of hell come raining down tonight, we'll stand alone for Baltimore and liberty. We'll stand alone for Baltimore.
My name is Bear Grylls. I'm going to teach you how to survive the wild. I will parachute into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on my back and my brain. I will have to overcome the dangers that the environment throws at me. I'm coming in without proper equipment, so it will be very dangerous. A normal person would not be able to last a day, but I am no normal person. I am Bear Grylls. I am awesome and super trained, so I would be able to last forever. If you get lost though, ask yourself, WWBGT, and you just might make it home.
I'm landing out somewhere in the middle of the urban jungle. I've got to make a home with nothing but the clothes on my back. There's our signal.
Okay, I've landed in the jungle. The first thing they always say is to find some shelter. So, here we go. Your shelter should be comfortable, because comfort is top priority in the wild. It's got the comfort I need for their head, but it just isn't right. You gotta keep looking. No good bags. Oh, man. Now this is perfect. Shelters help you from the weather conditions. It protects you from rain and snow and stuff, and tigers. Lots of them tigers. And they also help me sleep because my eyes hurt. Hot. I'm tired. The sun is beating down on me. I'm gonna be dehydrated if I don't get some water fast. Experts say that if you listen to the ground, you can follow the underground rivers to the water source. So, watch me. Okay. This way. All right, I found a good river right here. It's running this way. Come on. Still here. Nothing here. I can hear it. We found it. Oh, sweet nectar of life. There are some amazing creatures here, indigenous to this part of the jungle. Look, Oh my gosh, there's a stampede of wild animals coming our way. Quick, take some cover.
Nanny!
Now that I'm all hydrated, it's time to look for some protein and food because I'm hungry. It is very hard to find food in the jungle. You must know where to look. However, the food could be anywhere, really. So you must look in every nook and cranny you see. Oh, sweetness, this is delicious. Sometimes things in the wild don't taste as good. Oh, this will be one of those things. But desperate times call for desperate measures. Oh man. When in the jungle, always keep your eyes peeled for any signs of danger. I've been walking a long time, and my feet hurt. So it's time to look out for some mode of transportation. And it matches my shoelaces perfectly. Now we ride. Okay. I remember, kids, when traveling in the jungle, safety first. Oh my word. Oh my gosh, I just want to go home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home.
Lonely, I'm Mr. Lonely. I have nobody for my own.
I gotta get out. I'm out of food. I'm out of water. I gotta get out of here. I gotta get out of here.
Okay guys, so last week I told my mom I was going to get my nose pierced and she didn't even care.
Yeah, I have the same problem. Last month, I went into an alley and I found a man who was selling Rottweilers, and then I bought one, and my parents just couldn't stop saying how cute it was.
Let's do something that'll get everyone's attention. Then they'll take us seriously.
That looks so cute.
Young bad girls do it well. Live faster, young bad girls do it well. Live faster, young bad girls do it well. Live faster, young
are we gonna do?
I got this.
Corn dogs.
Jacob, is this you?
Yeah?
Being taken seriously is so hard.
Yeah, especially with this whole house robbing thing.
But you brought us to your house. Ugh. Well, I think I have an idea that'll get us into some real trouble.
Sydney, I think you got this one.
I don't think I'm ready for this. Just be straightforward. You can do it.
Welcome to my daycare. But aren't you a little bit old to be checking in?
I'm not checking in. I'm here to kidnap somebody.
What?
Kidnap.
The kids are done with their naps. Here. Yay!
Never mind. I don't want her.
We're gonna die young. Let's make the most of the night like we're gonna die young. Hearts out our minds, running till we out of time. Wild child's looking good, living hard just like we should. Don't care who's watching when we tearing it up, you know. That magic that we got, nobody can touch. Looking for some trouble tonight.
Whatever.
Take my hand, I'll show you the wild side. Like it's the last night of our lives. We'll keep dancing till we die. I hear your heartbeat to the beat of the drums. Oh, what a shame that you came here with someone.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting tired of this.
I know, we haven't gone anywhere.
Hey, on the bright side, at least we have these super cool outfits for school tomorrow.
Hey! What in the heck is going on here? You can't dress like that at Boulder City High School. What are you thinking? This is like so passing. I mean, I'm sorry. What are you trying to be, a biker or what? What's with the zip things on the... No. And sparkly? You're not allowed to be more sparkly than I am. It's in the rules. You're just going to have to go right now. What? Where did you get this thing? Ponies forever? It looks like you're like 3 years old or something. I mean, I'm sorry, but guys don't wear little fluffy pony shirts. I mean, I guess they can if they want to. I mean, it's okay with me if they want to, but it's, and then the color in the pants. See, this is with the ponies and then the sort of the horse paducher color pants. It's just like you're throwing it in our face. I'm sorry. Go. You get to the deal. Sweetie, what's this color? You know I'm allergic to anything that's even close to orange or beige. Do you want me to break out in hives? And, you know, please, I mean, for heaven's sakes, it's the end of February. It's 16 degrees. What are you wearing sleeves for? And the pants? No. The shoes. Would you look at those shoes? Your toe is sticking out the hole of your shoes. What do you think this place is? We have standards. You go to the dean right now.
I'm shocked too. I'm supposed to be locked up too. You escape, but I escape. You be in Paris, get passed up too. Also hot, let's get faded. Liberties for like 6 days. Gold bottles, skull models, spilling ace on my sick days. Also hot, behave. Just might let you meet gay. Shot towns, B roads, moving the next BK. Also hot, motherfuckers wanna find me. That's great. That's great.
Hoodlums.
Okay, this is big.
Yeah?
Put those scroll down, it's heavy.
I've heard about our files. It's covered, isn't it?
Filthy. Put this girl's down. They're giving her the death sentence. But if I have any say, they'll wait off just a little longer.
You're going to go and interrogate her, aren't you?
Kate, if we get a confession, that is the big break that we've needed for so long.
But
you can get that huge promotion you've always wanted. If you help me.
That
Come on.
does sound nice.
You've stood by me so far. Just a little longer.
I don't know.
Please.
All right, I'll get what you want.
Just bring me anything you find.
On it.
Game changer. Time waster. Oh boy. And Nara. Can I call you Nara? Look, I'm gonna stop the small talk there. I don't know if you comprehend the situation you're in right now, but the silent treatment isn't going to stop the inevitable. The clock is ticking down for you. The only path that is clearing leads to the death chair. At least that's what everyone around here is saying. Although lately, you seem to be holding the short end. Yep. Such a shame to see such potential go to waste. Although... that doesn't have to be so. Just one confession, and you don't have to be a dead man. Or woman. Yeah, I'm not that funny. All my buddies out there are better at jokes. But yet again, they're a bit frightened of you. Not so easily scared into submission, however. Not with you, at least. You should be. She speaks, yet she says nothing. So, do you not like to talk, or do you just have little to say? So, one moment you're playing frightening, and then the other you're playing innocent. I've seen that once or twice before in my career. Very unoriginal. You really don't want to stay among both of them. Isn't there anyone, relatives, friends, family members, anyone that would want to still see you alive? Okay, sore subject. Maybe you want to see your legacy move on. what you did could just go about in any history books. What about a true legacy? This might be going out on a limb, but who knows, maybe you could, after so and so many years, get out of jail. Small chance, but could marry up, start a family, you know, even. Acting disinterested won't get you anywhere. It says here you might have some possible accomplices. Makes sense. All that work seems unfitting of one person, even for the likes of you. If this is true, they might beat to the punch for a confession. From the looks of the evidence, you're the mastermind, and that might rat you out. Now, this is your only chance to make sure you're safe from the Green Mile. This isn't a first. Look, I've been playing nice, but let me spell it out for you. You are going to get the death sentence. I don't know how you can think that playing innocent is going to save you, because they have evidence leading up to you, whether by your mistake or someone else's. Now, would you stop wasting my time and sign the confession? This game that you're playing won't make me quit. In fact, I can go all day if I have to.
Commissioner?
Yeah?
Found something. You might want to see it.
Hand it over. Well, well, well. Looks like you've been holding off on your relationship ties, Inara. Kate? Sit down. I think we finally got her. So this right here, this is your lover. You two look good together. Although I'm not so sure if she's in on your crimes. Might just have to bring him in.
Jake.
You know, I might resort to a more physical interrogation. Anything to get them to talk. Come on, Inara. Don't make this harder on all of us. Just sign the paper and it'll all be over. Who knows? You might just live to see your love again.
It's about damn time you should.
want you by my side, so that I never feel alone again. They've always been so
Probably just about break.
Who broke my headphones?
Hey, what's the problem?
Someone was breaking my headphones. Who was that?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, that was me.
And?
Well, now you have a broken pair of headphones.
A few moments later.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who gets drunk next to you. And if I haver, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who's havering to you. But I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 more to be the man who walked 1,000 miles to fall out at your door. But I'm walking, 'cause I know I'm gonna be the man who's working hard for you.
No!
Sorry, too late.
Are you crazy, old man?
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who gets drunk next to you. And if I haver, yeah, I know I'm gonna be.
Hey, look what I found here.
Oh, that's cool. Well, at least now I don't have to buy a new pair of headphones for it.
You know what? I'm going to take a nap now. Dad,
What?
look over there.
What now? There's nothing. Whatever.
Huh? I don't get it. You know what? I get rid of you.
Hey, Flo.
Well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you when I go out. I wanna know what love is. I want you to show me.
Oh, hey, Abby. Oh. So sorry.
I'm fine, I'm fine.
Okay. So, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Okay. Addison, would you like to go to the dance with me? I mean, I know it's this Saturday, and we probably already have a date, but I just think it'd be really fun.
Sure, I'll go with you.
Really?
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. I mean, cool. And, I'll pick you up around 7.
Can I just meet at your house?
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure.
All right. Sounds good.
See you, Will.
All right, bye.